The Temple of Wisdom stood in Alexa, where humans and demi-humans lived side by side, as the kingdom's greatest vault of knowledge. Then the alarms erupted, heavy impacts shook the temple, and word spread that the enemy had already begun its assault. Inside the castle, panic surged as the staff realized the fortress had already been breached. Some of the temple men broke at once, shouting that resistance was hopeless and demanding to know where the guards had gone. Then they spotted the invaders' banner, and the fear deepened when they recognized the Elwyn mercenaries. That fear sharpened the instant Merida appeared at the front, proving demonkind's most dreaded mercenaries had come in person. Merida locked eyes on a young man in the hall and knew right away he was the one she wanted. The startled young man froze, then awkwardly raised a hand just as she closed the gap. Merida stopped right in front of him, called him Elbert, the famed fountain of wisdom, and bluntly said the rumors were true after all. Elbert nervously tried to explain that he had actually been expecting Miss Merida, even as her presence left the moment impossible to ignore. Elbert revealed that, unbelievable as it sounded, he was the youngest priest in a temple of wisdom. He explained that he had been reincarnated from another world, where his previous life had ended as an Akiri Kotaro at 32. Using the knowledge he had brought from Japan, he became known far and wide as the Fountain of Wisdom. He also possessed a rare skill that let him read people's status and even glimpse their future potential, though parts of it often left him quietly frustrated. With the king's approval, he used that ability to guide official appointments. But before long, everything began to collapse. Enraged elders accused Reverend Albert of failing to show Prince Orgus the respect his rank demanded. Before the court, Albert was sentenced to missionary work in the kingdom's borderlands and demoted all the way down to apprentice. Crushed by the sentence, he silently bowed to his lord as his easy life ended in an instant. The temple leaders tore into him as ungrateful and foolish, insisting all their support had been repaid with disgrace. At the center of it all stood Orgus Daedalus, first Prince of Alexa, mocking Albert's title and dismissing the Fountain of Wisdom as a joke. Albert lowered his head and apologized to the prince, while inwardly realizing that Orgus's status was disastrously bad. Orgus laughed at Albert's humiliation, called his worldwide reputation idiotic, and sneered that even his position was nothing but a tool for profit. Albert explained that the prince's inner circle was the worst among the corrupt missionary brothers, abducting young women from the countryside and forcing them into city brothels, and that one of his own servants had been taken that way 6 months earlier. He said he had tried to appeal directly to the king, but the head priest informed the prince first and destroyed his only chance. The head priest coldly insisted that Albert had acted alone and declared the temple had nothing to do with it. One of the corrupt men then offered a glittering box of coins as a humble gift and praised the reverend as a truly wise man. The man casually asked about Albert's young servant, making sure he knew exactly which girl he meant. Albert answered that he had let her take a few days off, struggling to keep his voice steady. Others quickly warned that the road she was traveling was dangerous and crawling with bandits, making the threat impossible to miss. The reverend grinned, sided with the prince, and ordered his men to keep Albert tied up until they were gone. Laughter rang out around Albert as the memory pushed toward what came next. Merida revealed that she had heard interesting things from Albert's servant and, after speaking with him, decided to make him her military lead and tactician. Albert stared at Merida in shock as it sank in that she was the famed Blood Barbarian, a top demon commander with overwhelming strength and terrifying ability in every field. Albert nervously admitted he was technically still a loyal priest of the Kingdom of Alexa, but reassured himself that even her difficult flaws might be manageable with the right approach. He quickly proposed that she capture him and force him to work for her, and Merida loved the idea on the spot. Merida declared that she had found what she came for, and Albert urged everyone to leave before the royal guard arrived. The group escaped at once, riding hard from the area before anyone could cut them off. Soon after, the story shifted to the Elwyn mercenary base camp. Albert called out for Rochelle and anxiously asked if she was safe. Rochelle appeared in a maid outfit and explained that she had dressed that way because she wanted to surprise him, leaving him stunned at the sight. Albert admitted he felt uneasy, but Rochelle firmly said that after he had saved her, she could not stand by without trying to save him too. Rochelle explained that before this, she had been taken into one of the street brothels, and that Albert had played a key role in pulling her out. Merida brightly praised how well the maid outfit suited Rochelle, while Albert realized with awkward surprise that Merida had been the one who chose it. Rochelle nervously said Merida was the person she trusted most, and asked Albert to respect that, while Merida proudly confirmed it. Merida teased that the rumors about Albert liking beautiful women seemed true, then bluntly added that she had done nothing improper with Rochelle despite how it looked. Merida stepped in close and calmly added that she saw nothing wrong with his preferences, leaving Albert flustered by her boldness. As Albert recoiled on the bed, Merida pressed the issue and asked if he had really believed she only wanted his mind. Merida held her ground and declared that he was exactly her type, praising his calm nature and making the situation hard to diffuse. Albert froze in confusion as Marita openly stated her interest, while Rochelle watched in alarm. With a determined grin, Marita decided she wanted him by her side and made it clear she would not take no for an answer. Marita eagerly declared that Albert was exactly her type and boldly invited Rochelle to take her side, while Rochelle surprisingly agreed and left him in total disbelief. Trapped in the tense situation, Albert asked whether Marita was serious, and she calmly confirmed that she was fully committed as long as Rochelle remained unharmed. Rochelle, burning with nervous resolve, insisted that she wanted to devote herself to Master Alfred too, and Marita took that as proof of her determination. Marita right away seized the lead and drove the conversation forward, while Albert could only yield under the force of her confidence. Marita smugly pointed out Albert's inexperience and reacted to his awkward response with amused surprise, which only made the moment more overwhelming. Drawing on knowledge from her previous life, Marita realized her greater stamina gave her the advantage, so she deliberately shifted tactics to stay in control. Thinking fast, Albert used what he had learned from the Temple of Wisdom's books and instructed Rochelle to interrupt Marita and break her concentration. Though deeply embarrassed, Rochelle obeyed and moved close to Marita, leaving Marita startled as the sudden counter cracked her composure. The night filled with strained voices and restless pacing as the chaotic confrontation continued inside the house. By the next day, the exhausting clash had finally ended. Marita flushed with frustration and called Albert a shameless pervert, shocked that someone so young already knew how to throw her off balance that well. Albert awkwardly defended himself by saying he was a priest of Alega, the god of wisdom, so that kind of knowledge was only natural. Refusing to concede, Marita demanded another chance to settle things even as Albert panicked and protested that she was pushing far too hard. Once things finally calmed down, Albert turned serious and asked whether Marita had summoned him because she needed his plans to reclaim the Elvian Empire. Albert pressed further and asked why Marita had been exiled to the enemy kingdom of Alexa, leaving her visibly shaken as she struggled to answer. Marita admitted the story was absurd and revealed that the Demon King had recommended a suitor for her, but she sent him back in terrible condition. She explained that the man had tried to force himself on her, and when the head of the Elwyn family learned what happened, Marita was stripped of her status and cast out. Marita then revealed that she and the Demon King had grown up together, and that he had always cared for her like a sister. Albert realized the Demon King had arranged the engagement with good intentions, without understanding what kind of men Marita truly preferred. As Albert thought it through, he concluded that Marita clearly had a special bond with the Demon King, and that the Elwyn mercenaries might really be able to pull this off. Marita asked whether anyone could speak to the Demon King on Albert's behalf, then suggested that the Margrave and her sister's spouse might be able to help. Albert leaned in and quietly said that if that failed, he still had another plan, leaving Marita listening in confusion. Whatever he whispered instantly lit Marita up, and she eagerly said it sounded perfect and that they should begin at once. Albert smiled and said he would prepare the letter right away, while Marita fell silent, still trying to process what he had said. Before he could leave, Marita all of a sudden called out and declared that she had made up her mind, catching Albert off guard. Marita rushed at him, confessed that she truly liked him, and said she wanted his support as her husband. A blushing Albert nervously asked whether she was truly serious about making him her husband, and Marita praised both his looks and his intelligence as proof they were a perfect match. Marita then hesitated and admitted there was just one small condition. Flustered but steady, she said he would need to accept her keeping close company with women. Albert was left utterly bewildered as Marita explained that he was the only man whose presence did not repulse her. Marita cheerfully admitted that she loved beautiful women and wanted to surround herself with them through their engagement. Albert eagerly said he wanted her to enjoy that affection with him beside her as a supportive husband, and Marita was stunned by how openly he accepted her feelings. Albert realized that becoming Marita's husband could give him far more influence than serving her alone, and might even help him regain favor with the Empire. Smiling brightly, Albert said he would gladly become her husband and serve her, but he could, especially if it meant staying close to many beautiful demon women. Marita laughed with delight and declared that their decision was made. A maid named Rochelle right away reacted in shock and asked whether that meant she now officially belonged to Mistress Marita's household. Rochelle pledged herself under Marita's command, while Marita happily said they would make up for the time she had missed before. Albert quickly cut through the excitement and reminded everyone that he still had to write the letter before anything else. 1 week passed. When a response finally arrived for Albert, he calmly asked that Miss Marita be gathered in the square at once. Albert realized the preparations were finally complete and quietly resolved to move forward. A short while later, Albert faced a room full of hostile men and worried that not one of them would listen. One man smugly called him Albert, said he had heard about his scandalous night, and admitted the commotion had made everyone jealous. Albert right away understood that this was exactly how men like them would react, and dryly noted that the rumors had spread after all. With a cheerful smile, Albert apologized by saying Lady Marita had been overly insistent on his company, then added that Rochelle had been especially worked up that night. The crowd burst into loud laughter while some onlookers could only stare in disbelief. Rochelle blushed furiously and shouted that Master Albert had already told everyone not to talk about that. The men laughed even harder, praising Albert for being the first ordinary man to spend the night with the princess, while one admitted he was genuinely impressed. Lady Marita cut through the mockery and angrily declared that they had gone too far, insisting that Albert might be a little strange, but was exceptionally intelligent. The men backed off with teasing smiles, saying she was defending her man so fiercely that it was obvious she had completely fallen for him. Albert smiled in quiet relief, realizing the mercenary support was sincere after all. Marita snapped that the men were a pack of jerks, but the others only laughed, taking her outrage as proof of the Elwyn mercenaries' fierce bond. As the laughter settled, one mercenary asked the question that mattered most: would Albert's plan truly get them home? Albert produced an official pardon and explained that Margrave Stefan had spoken to the Demon King, who would forgive them if they seized the 3 border towns inside the kingdom of Alexa. Some mercenaries right away pushed back, worrying that taking those towns would turn every nearby settlement against them. Albert answered calmly that once the Demon King's empire moved in, those towns would have little power to resist. He reminded them they were mercenaries hired for war and assured them the empire would silence complaints before the locals could even rise. Albert then laid out the border politics, explaining that Tyzon, Benia, and Zura held no real loyalty to Alexa and were ruled by abusive lords who only sided with whoever profited them most. Spreading his arms, Albert declared that only the Elwyn mercenaries could carry out this mission and promised that Marita would not only return home but reclaim her former status. The mercenaries exploded into cheers, and the situation becomes awkward. Marita charged with the Elwyn mercenaries, and their war cry thundered across the battlefield as they rushed the castle. As the wagon shook onward, Albert reflected that he had once been called the Fountain of Wisdom at the Temple of Wisdom before choosing to stand beside Marita as her husband and military tactician. At Venia Castle in the Kingdom of Alexa, alarm raced along the walls as the defenders spotted the approaching force. Marita proudly named herself the leader of the Elwyn mercenaries and announced that she had come to take the castle. The stunned guards recognized the bandits and shouted in panic for them to stay away from the gate. Marita silenced them instantly and threw herself into a fierce assault. Her strike smashed through the castle gate in a single blow. The defenders stared in shock as the gate slid apart, unable to believe one swing had done so much damage. Panicked soldiers shouted at each other to stay calm and ordered the heavy guns to fire on the attackers. Before they could recover, one guard collapsed in shock after seeing their captain struck down, and the others froze at the sudden loss. The defenders heard destruction echoing from deeper inside the castle, and the distant cries told them the attackers had already broken through. In the chaos, soldiers cried out that demons had come as the impact tore through their formation and sent them reeling. Marita laughed and boasted that she would tear through the tiny backwoods castle and bring down everyone resisting inside. When one soldier nervously wondered whether that was really something a princess should say, Marita only laughed, while another voice nearby reacted in awkward alarm. Several days earlier at the campsite, someone had called out to Lady Marita, trying to get her attention. Marita answered lazily, and Albert told her there were 3 rules she had to remember for the coming attack. Albert firmly set the terms: no attacks on defenseless civilians, no needless destruction of property, and any wealth taken would be redistributed to commoners instead of stolen. Marita protested in disbelief, arguing that looting and smashing things were the best parts of battle, and demanded to know why he had to be so strict. Albert calmly warned her that if she truly wanted to go home, she had to choose between the easy path and the hard one. Pressed into a corner, Marita reluctantly gave in and admitted that her men would obey those terms. Albert told Marita to think of the castle and its people as tribute she could offer to the Demon King. He added that if that gift arrived completely ruined, Lady Marita would likely be punished instead. Marita flinched, and Albert pressed further, warning that if she misbehaved, he might lose his position, and with it, her chance to go home. Hearing that, Marita complained that he was cruel. Even as sweat ran down her face, Marita ordered everyone to follow the 3 rules and threatened to punish anyone who disobeyed, so her troops quickly fell in line. The next instant, Marita launched the assault and roared for her forces to charge and seize the castle. Her army surged in at once, overwhelming resisting guards and smashing through the defenders' line. Faced with that overwhelming assault, several soldiers dropped their weapons, and Marita's side announced that anyone who surrendered willingly would be spared. Then the air grew heavy, and a new voice answered. Some armored defenders raised their weapons and declared that they still would not surrender the castle. Marita slammed another defender to the ground and declared that they would now face the full force of her anger. With a fearless grin, Marita admitted that she actually preferred enemies who resisted. She dismissed the fallen soldiers as no challenge worth remembering. A horned knight stepped forward, praised Marita for making it this far, and introduced herself as Basamar, the Bear of the Borderlands, declaring that Marita would face her next. From the rear, Marita's side shouted that the demons were finished and urged Basamar to cut them down. Basamar lunged in and vowed to bring Merida down with one crushing blow. Merida met the attack head-on, stopping Basamar's heavy strike before it could land cleanly. Still smiling, Merida shattered Basamar's weapon with raw strength, tearing a shocked cry from the night. In the very next instant, Merida broke through her guard, and Basamar could only stare in disbelief. As Basamar fell, nearby soldiers screamed that Merida had defeated her in a single blow, while Merida coolly demanded a real challenge because that fight had not even tested her. Panic shook the castle walls as someone admitted they had no chance of holding out. A soldier happily reported to the princess that the castle was now theirs. The invaders explained that everyone who had surrendered willingly had been tied up in the town square. That left only the local lord and his family, still hiding inside their residence. The princess stormed in and ordered her men to drag them out, startling the lord and everyone in the room. She faced the lord directly and declared that she had come to take his castle, leaving him shaken and confused. The terrified lord instantly offered money and begged to surrender if it would spare his life. He kept pleading, desperate not to be executed. Rather than accept that pitiful display, the princess struck him hard and shattered his composure in an instant. As the lord coughed and threatened revenge, she coldly brushed it aside and said her fist simply reacted badly to arrogant cowards. The lord tried to steady himself by muttering that even if this castle had fallen, reinforcements from Zura and Taizan would arrive soon enough. The princess crushed that hope at once by revealing those forces had already been captured, leaving him speechless. Elsewhere, Albert decided it was time to bring everything to a close and judged that his tactician should already be in place. When Albert arrived, the princess noticed him and casually confirmed that she had already taken the castle. Thrilled by the result, she told Albert they had secured an impressive haul of prisoners and treasure. Albert replied that if that was true, then it was time for her to give the speech he had prepared her for. The princess right away recoiled in embarrassment and admitted that speech would be awkward for her. Albert reminded her that everything they were doing was for her return home, and she reluctantly admitted he was right. Putting on a confident smile, the princess addressed the people and declared that the cruel lord who had stolen wealth through unjust labor had now fallen to the Demon King's justice and the elven mercenaries. She then announced, by order of the Demon King, that all confiscated valuables would be distributed equally among the people of the town. Merida kept smiling through the speech, declared that the town would now come under the Empire's direct rule, and inwardly groaned at how troublesome it all was. Albert quietly cued the crowd to cheer for the Empire first, and then for the Demon King. The people followed right away, shouting praise for the Empire and the Demon King as Merida stood before them. As the applause spread, Albert happily noted that they had reclaimed the citizens without losing many of their own. The seized gold was loaded up and redistributed to commoners and even to the enemy soldiers as wages, while Albert noted that whoever governed next would inherit a far easier task. Watching the result, Merida laughed in relief, and Albert reflected that her overwhelming strength, paired with the mercenaries' discipline, had made the wild rumors seem true. While the applause continued outside, Albert turned away and decided that dealing with the confused loyalists was Heidi's problem now. 1 week passed after the city had been taken and stabilized. Soon after, the Alencian Empire's garrison arrived in full formation, signaling the official response. Their leader introduced himself as Margrave Stefan von Balduria, greeted Merida warmly after a long separation, and teasingly called himself her brother-in-law. Merida cheerfully gave all the credit to her husband, while Stefan remarked that his sister Leah had been looking forward to welcoming Merida home as well. Stefan then turned to Albert, guessed that he was the husband, and politely introduced himself while studying him with clear interest. Albert awkwardly realized Stefan was linking him to the man Merida had chosen, even after rejecting and nearly killing the suitor selected for her by the Demon King. As Stefan observed him more carefully, he remarked that Albert seemed ordinary at first glance, yet somehow held major influence in the Empire and unusually high evaluations. Merida proudly declared that Big Brother Albert was incredible and said he had brought everyone there to willingly accept the Empire's rule. Stefan looked over the peaceful city and admitted he had noticed the warm reception on the way in, which explained why everything felt so orderly. Impressed, Stefan praised Albert's plan and wisdom, then half-jokingly asked whether Albert would rather serve under him instead. Merida right away cut in, snapped that she would not share Albert even with Stefan as her brother-in-law, and forced him to retreat with a laugh. Watching the exchange, Stefan warmly thought his wife Leah would adore Merida, while also recognizing that Albert was the kind of man who could carry impossible ideas all the way to the end. As the tension finally loosened, it almost seemed they might enjoy a brief peace at last. Merida agreed that Albert should probably speak with Berest himself, though the suggestion made her visibly nervous. Albert was stunned and asked whether they truly expected him to speak to that man right away. He learned that Berest was no ordinary man, but Lord Berest, the current head of the Elwyn family and Merida's uncle. Merida explained that Ashley, her former base of operations, was currently under her uncle's control. She realized that if she was to be formally welcomed home as nobility, her uncle would have to restore her title and lands in Elwyn's domain. Albert admitted he was uneasy because this was the same man his enemies called the Crimson Spear, while Marita frankly said she had never been good with her uncle either, since even the nobles on their side feared him as a dangerous fighter. The fox-eared woman smiled and said that seemed to be mutual, then praised their side for having a wise military strategist to handle it. Albert forced a shaky smile as he realized this outcome had been part of the plan from the very beginning. Blushing, Marita shyly asked Albert to take a chance on it. As he looked at her, Albert quietly realized this was exactly the moment he had been waiting for. Albert let himself drift into a vision of a peaceful life with Marita in her homeland, and the hope nearly showed on his face. Catching himself, Albert said he would go ahead as Marita's messenger and face the situation himself. Moved by his resolve, and the situation shifts into territory no one prepared for. Far away in the kingdom of Alexa, at Orgus's residence, that fragile calm shattered all at once. Orgus flew into a rage, spat out the words low-born trash, and refused to believe what he was hearing. In a furious outburst, Orgus blamed his subordinates for everything and shouted that disaster was closing in on him. His men nervously revealed that the king had discovered what they had been doing. Orgus realized the priest had sent a letter to the king exposing everything, and the thought made his fury boil over. As his followers demanded answers, Orgus bitterly explained that the letter had been addressed to his older brother, so he had no way to intercept it, and Sir Goran's place in the succession only made it worse. The letter had already reached the king through Orgus's brother, and now a formal response would come within days. Orgus's men panicked and called the situation hopeless, urging each other to destroy the evidence before it was too late. Orgus snapped that they were fools and revealed that their towns had already fallen to the Empire. The three froze in shock and blurted out that it could not be true. Orgus angrily insisted he did not know whether this was tied to the marauding demons who had attacked the priest. Then he coldly declared that the three of them were now nothing but disposable baggage, though they still had one use left. Before they could react, armored men closed in, and the terrified followers realized Orgus had betrayed them. As they cried out that he was making them take the blame, the guards cut them off and carried out his order. Left alone at last, Orgus leaned back with a bitter sigh and pinned the entire disaster on that troublesome priest. His anger surged again as he swore he would find Albert and put a bounty on his head. Soon after, the scene shifted to Elwyn and the halls of Ashley Castle. Kneeling before the horned ruler of Ashley Castle, Albert admitted that everything had unfolded exactly as he had written in his letter, while the ruler mocked him as the fool chosen to marry his niece. The ruler fixed him with a glare and accused Albert of dragging his niece into military strategy, then trying to steal his title as well by using that plan to bring her home. Albert answered seriously that it sounded awful when put like that, but he could not deny it was basically true. One of the armed guards quietly remarked that Albert had seen through everything. In the next instant, the ruler drove his weapon to Albert's neck and warned that he could end him in moments. Albert went rigid with fear and realized the ruler meant every word and one mistake would end it here. Even so, Albert asked to speak, and boldly promised that he could raise the Elwyn legacy into one of the great lineages of the Empire. The ruler snarled that Albert was a fool and demanded to know what a child like him could possibly achieve. Albert right away listed his worth, insisting that he could restrain Marita's reckless impulses, handle domestic affairs, diplomacy, and intelligence, and free her from the constant burdens of rule. He finished by arguing that this would allow Marita to devote herself entirely to war and rise as one of the Empire's greatest generals. Lord Beerist kept the weapon at Albert's throat, watching to see whether the young strategist would crack. A faint smile appeared on Lord Beerist's face as Albert's answer seemed to entertain him. Lord Beerist burst into laughter and admitted he had long been waiting for a man bold enough to make an offer for Marita after actually managing to rein in her wild nature. He then confessed that he had never been suited for lordship, and the atmosphere turns heavy with unspoken awareness. Still laughing, Lord Beerist said he would hand over the reins if Albert could truly bear them, and Albert answered that he was ready to stake his life on it. Lord Beerist then spoke with pride about Marita, saying his niece was extraordinary and unmatched as a general, despite her difficult personality. Albert was left stunned and pointed out that he had assumed Lord Beerist did not even like her. Lord Beerist rejected that at once and declared that no one in the Elwyn family disliked Marita, because to them she was practically a goddess of war. He explained that he had only been especially strict with her because everyone else spoiled her far too much. As Albert tried to absorb that revelation, Lord Beerist told him that Marita was now his responsibility, leaving Albert quietly repeating the Lord's name in shock. Lord Beerist said he had already sent one of his fastest men to fetch Marita, then cheerfully declared that with that settled, it was time to feast, while Albert could only admit his deep gratitude. The moment takes an uncomfortable turn. Lord Beerist roared with laughter, and the interaction becomes difficult to navigate. A full banquet was arranged at once, and the scene grows awkward with no easy escape. One excited woman thrust out an empty cup and demanded more sake, making it clear the feast was already spiraling out of control. While Lord Beerist kept drinking and told Elbert not to act too refined for sake, Elbert tried to refuse and already felt himself being overwhelmed. The pressure only intensified as more drink was poured anyway, and Elbert gave a startled reaction when he realized no one intended to let him escape politely. Two horned women approached and eagerly looked Elbert over, deciding that he was the man who had won Merida and teasing that someone so small hardly looked enough for her. Flustered and cornered by the sudden attention, Elbert nervously asked who the women were. Still amused, Lord Beerist introduced them as his wife Frey and his son Latour. Latour casually told Elbert to drop the formal title since they were close in age, and Elbert politely said he was pleased to meet both Frey and Latour. Elbert accepted and addressed him as Latour, and Latour happily declared that now they could finally begin drinking. As Elbert asked what exactly they were beginning, the family excitedly announced that the time had come. Merida all of a sudden remembered what was coming, and the unease on her face showed she had nearly forgotten the family custom too. Latour eagerly kicked things off and declared that it was time for the demon family's traditional test of strength. With dramatic flair, Latour presented the confused Elbert as the bridegroom and announced that he would be the center of the event. Elbert panicked at once and protested that no one had warned him about any of this. Grinning, Latour explained that the man who married into the family was expected to prove his strength in whatever style his new relatives chose. Still alarmed, Elbert turned to Merida and asked whether that outrageous custom was actually real. Merida sheepishly confirmed that it was mostly a formality for the family to judge a newcomer's strength and insisted it was not meant to put him in real danger. Elbert anxiously pointed out that if he seemed weak, Merida's family would never truly accept him. Merida shot back that as his military tactician, his safety mattered like life and death to her, and she insisted she knew his amazing qualities better than anyone and could still win everyone over afterward even if he lost badly. Merida cheerfully told Elbert to hurry and decide how they would compete, while he panicked that she was cornering him with no way out. When Elbert asked in disbelief whether literally anything was allowed, Merida grinned and confirmed there were no restrictions. The surrounding demons loudly swore that whatever he chose was fine, because a demon never went back on their word. Realizing he had complete freedom, Elbert declared with sudden confidence that he knew exactly what contest he wanted and prepared to name it. Elbert's chosen battlefield turned out to be a riding surface, leaving Merida staring at it in confusion and asking what it was supposed to mean. Elbert proudly announced a dictation battle, saying that as a civil servant, his pen was his mightiest weapon, while Merida looked utterly unconvinced. With a smug smile, Elbert reminded everyone that they had explicitly said he could choose any kind of battle he wanted. Merida, stunned but trapped by the rules, declared that demons do not lie and that they had no choice but to honor his decision. Merida protested in frustration and demanded to know why she had to take part, but the others coldly told her that because she had started this, she had to finish it. Trying to act fearless, Merida insisted that writing a few words should be easy, while a voice beside her urged her on like this was now her battle to survive. A burly demon steeled himself and declared that once challenged, there was no backing down, no matter how impossible the contest felt. Another participant right away panicked as her hand began to shake uncontrollably, and her fear made it clear this so-called simple battle was already crushing them. A girl raised the sample text and announced that everyone would now transcribe the sentence, while warning them to keep their handwriting flawless. As the challenge began, one demon nearly collapsed after a single letter. Merida forced herself to insist it should still be manageable, and another competitor complained that the brush felt unbearably heavy in his hand. The narration explained that demons excelled at producing perfect written records, but being forced to write unrelated material drove them into severe distress. While Elbert calmly continued dictating and writing, the demons around him spiraled deeper into panic, and the observer could only watch in amazement. Merida finally broke, apologized to Elbert in despair, and admitted she had never imagined being dragged into such a nightmare. A last competitor stared ahead in total shock, feeling as if the room itself were closing in while her body wobbled under the pressure. The bearded demon grew so dizzy from the writing contest that his vision blurred and he felt utterly crushed by the ordeal. As the contestant slumped over in exhaustion, the result was announced, and Elbert von Elwyn was declared the winner. Elbert explained that after claiming victory, he spent the next hour breaking the phrase down for all 700 people in the castle, and by the end he had won the respect of his new demon family. The scene shifted to the aftermath of that effort, where the horned girl crashed into the bearded demon and angrily blamed her father for everything. The bearded demon fired back in the middle of the scuffle and furiously called his son an idiot as their fight kept escalating. Both of them all of a sudden froze when they noticed someone nearby, and their anger turned to alarm as they demanded to know who had seen them fighting. Elbert stepped forward with a smile, revealed that it was only him, and calmly asked what was going on. Flustered and sweating, the horned girl right away tried to deny responsibility and insisted that the whole mess was actually her father's fault. The bearded demon panicked too, and shot back that it was really his son's fault, while demanding to know what she was even talking about. Looking down at the wreckage, Albert reminded them that they had agreed there would be no more fighting inside the castle, especially when the two of them always left destruction behind. The bearded demon begged Albert not to send him to the Room of Reflection, while the horned girl flusteredly tried to explain that this was something else. Albert revealed that they had created new rules to run Elwyn Dominion smoothly, and anyone who broke them would be locked in a small windowless room to practice transcription. That punishment chamber was known as the Room of Reflection, and its terrifying reputation rested on one command above all else: to act prudently. The two troublemakers instantly snapped to attention as Albert assigned Sir Burst to repair the stone wall first and then go out to plow the fields. Albert noted with quiet satisfaction that they obeyed everything he said, because among demons, power mattered above all else. With those rules firmly in place, Albert moved on to the wider management of the domain. He explained that Ashley Castle stood on a strategic point along the main bridleway between the Alansian Empire and the Kingdom of Alexa, making it a major trade stop for travelers and merchants. He added that the surrounding northern granary stretched across a vast area and produced roughly 40% of the Empire's food, making it the richest region in the Empire. From that, Albert concluded that the territory had to be protected at any cost. He explained that the Elwyn family had been entrusted with this vital land because their combat strength surpassed even that of most demons. As Albert reviewed the domain, he realized that governing land this fertile and orderly on paper should have been easy, yet the reality was already turning sour. When he asked for the town's tax ledger, the bearded demon went blank and clearly had no idea what Albert was talking about. Albert pressed harder and asked how the place had been managed at all if he had supposedly been overseeing tax collection this whole time. The bearded demon cheerfully confessed that he had simply let village chiefs and merchants keep whatever they wanted in local warehouses and vaults, assuming they could seize it back if war ever came. Realizing there really were records somewhere, Albert lit up for a moment, only for the bearded demon to casually dump a pile of books in front of him. Albert then discovered that they were not financial ledgers at all, but lists of military equipment and maps of possible battlefields, leaving him stunned by how wrong he had been about the job. Forcing down his despair, Albert decided he would have to investigate the town's finances himself and asked where the real vault was. The bearded demon said the vault was in the castle basement, then nervously tried to explain that recent spending had already drained most of their funds. The interaction becomes difficult to navigate. He hurriedly tried to reassure Albert that they had also made extra money by taking over borderland towns, and Albert could only accept that with visible unease. At Ashley Castle's vault, the guards recognized Albert and allowed him to approach without resistance. One guard explained that Lord Burst had approved Albert's visit and respectfully offered him the keys. The instant the vault was opened, Albert stopped cold at what waited inside. He found the shelves almost bare, realized the treasury was even worse than he had feared, and bitterly concluded that he was still underestimating demons. Back at Ashley Castle in the Elwyn domain, a heavy impact all of a sudden rang across the grounds. Marita proudly slammed down another mark of approval, clearly delighted with herself. She eagerly asked Albert how she had done, and he admitted it looked impressively convincing before leaning in for a closer check. After examining the document, Albert decided the seal was slightly crooked but still usable. Encouraged by that tiny victory, Marita right away asked if she could stop now and go train instead. Albert calmly told her to finish one more seal first, and Marita puffed up in frustration as she complained that he had promised to handle this tedious work himself. Marita grumbled that paperwork was not part of her job as a noble and worried she would only cause trouble if she pushed ahead carelessly, while Albert kept urging her on. Facing the mountain of documents, Marita protested that there were far too many words and demanded to know whether Albert had any real plan to finish all of it. Flustered and furious, Marita accused Albert of enjoying her misery, then bitterly insisted there was nothing enjoyable about any of this. Still red with irritation, Marita snapped that Albert was a huge jerk and stormed off in a sulk. Albert only smiled and casually reminded her that he knew she would come back later that night for dinner. A maid teasingly remarked that Marita's miserable face would get a reaction out of certain people, and Albert dryly replied that she would know, given her own overbearing streak. When the maid asked about their finances, Albert revealed that the vault had not been completely empty and that he had managed to recover a little over 49,000 gold. Shocked, the maid stammered that such a tiny amount made no sense and struggled to understand how their finances had collapsed so badly. As he sipped his tea, Albert explained that too many payroll obligations had piled up on top of the territory decisions made before he arrived. He clarified that while ordinary barons employed around 50 people, Elwyn kept nearly 200 on staff, most of them full-time soldiers, making the salary burden crushing. Albert reflected that such heavy security made sense for a wealthy town, though he let out a tired sigh as he thought about how vital this place was to protect. Looking at the nearly empty vault, he noted that they had at least recovered 5,000 gold coins from the towns they seized, giving them enough to start saving again and keep the domain moving. Rochelle apologized for not being able to do more, while Albert admitted he might collapse from exhaustion if he had to carry all of this alone. Even in that drained state, Albert praised Rochelle for already doing excellent work and told her to keep maintaining her information network, which she eagerly promised to do. After that, Albert turned to the looming stack of petitions and reluctantly decided that had to be his next battle. At Ashley Castle's food storage, Albert surveyed the huge stockpile, and the warehouse man explained that the supplies had built up because there had not been a war for a long time. Albert asked who was in charge there, and the man explained that some food was already beginning to spoil, so he wanted permission to deal with it quickly. Laughing awkwardly, the warehouse man said the demons only cared about the stockpile during wartime, and added that each village chief mostly left their supplies in his hands. Albert appreciated the help and noticed that the petitions had been sorted neatly, while realizing Millivice had unusual talent for domestic affairs that was being wasted in the warehouse. Sensing that hidden ability, Albert stopped the man and addressed him as Sir Millivice, drawing a startled reaction. Albert asked what should be prioritized in the area, and after a brief hesitation, Millivice urged him to hear an honest opinion. Millivice seriously explained that the ledgers had to be organized and waste reduced, because a prosperous domain would only make the Elwyn family stronger. Delighted by that answer, Albert said it matched his own thinking exactly and invited Millivice to become an official administrator under his direct employment. Millivice was stunned and admitted he would be honored, but even then he hesitated. Albert firmly declared that since he had been placed in charge here, he would decide for himself and hire Millivice as both warehouse manager and personal attendant with proper pay. Millivice reacted in disbelief at being offered 2 salaries, while Albert reasoned that doing 2 jobs made that only fair. Overwhelmed by the offer, Millivice quietly accepted. Millivice bowed and said that if he would be serving Albert, then Albert should stop calling him sir. Albert right away moved on and asked whether Millivice knew anyone in town who would buy all their surplus goods, and Millivice said he could approach a few merchants whenever Albert wished. Albert pushed for action by tomorrow if possible, leaving Millivice flustered by the sudden speed. Albert decided he had a plan, though he doubted the warehouse could be cleared quickly by ordinary methods. The next day, Marita called out to the demons and demanded their full attention. She announced that in that day's training, the squad that carried the most goods out of the warehouse would earn the right to serve as the vanguard in the next battle, and the demons exploded with excitement. One eager demon woman declared that she would become the first spear on the battlefield and fired herself up. A burly demon confidently insisted that no one there could beat him. Another ambitious fighter claimed that the head brigade position already belonged to her and drove the rivalry even higher. The goods were sorted by signal, with boxes marked by red or yellow cloth to be carried out while those marked blue were to be left untouched. At the command to begin, the demons surged forward in formation and started hauling crates at full speed. They were warned that taking the wrong color would bring punishment, while mistakes of any kind were met with fierce threats that kept everyone razor-focused. As the boxes rose into orderly rows, a bald onlooker marveled that Albert had disguised warehouse cleaning as combat training, while Albert ordered everyone to keep the stacks neat as the place visibly transformed. One exhausted demon woman laughed through her heavy breathing and insisted that her squad had carried the most boxes. A burly demon and a horned woman strained beneath towering stacks of crates as both sides shouted with fierce certainty that they would win. The final loads hit the ground, and the work was declared finished. The competitors instantly erupted into argument, with one claiming obvious victory, another refusing to yield, and the burly demon trapped between their rivalry. Marita told everyone to relax and enjoy the food and drinks while she counted the totals herself. As the shelves stood spotless, Millivice could only stare in awe that Albert had cleaned the once chaotic warehouse in half a day. Albert said the real work was only beginning and told Millivice to bring in the merchants at once, which Millivice happily agreed to do. Albert explained that the red boxes held spoiled food to be sold to farmers as fertilizer, while the yellow boxes held preserved food nearing its limit that could still be sold wholesale at a discount. Among the merchants, Millivice introduced Fran, an especially sharp provisions trader who had devised the color-coding system and gratefully acknowledged the help. It was explained that Fran ran a convenience shop on the battlefield, so Albert intended to treat him well and keep him on friendly terms. As Albert hired more civil servants and worked with Millivice, the accounts began running smoothly, and they reported earning 3,000 gold from food sales. Even so, Albert became buried under scheduling work and admitted he desperately needed a secretary. He first considered Rochelle, but she was already overloaded, and although she was highly capable as a commander, writing was not her strength. He then pictured the ideal assistant, and the situation becomes awkward. With that problem still pressing on him, Albert headed to the Merchants Guild to tackle the next issue. At the guild, Albert was formally welcomed inside by a waiting official. The official introduced himself as Rainveal, president of the Social Status Merchants Guild, and explained that many merchants passed through Ashley, each using different standards for weight and length. Rainveal admitted that the lack of one unified system had caused constant trouble, but Albert calmly said he had brought the answer. Elbert presented an official measuring set bearing the Elwyn family seal, and Rainvale reacted with stunned curiosity as Elbert explained that it was a complete certified apparatus. He then revealed that Lady Marita herself had created it and asked Rainvale to make copies and distribute them throughout the guild. Elbert cheerfully declared that anyone caught using measures outside the official Elwyn standard within the domain would face strict punishment. Rainvale was amazed that Elbert had already prepared such a complete solution. When Elbert asked for his opinion and the situation shifts into territory no one prepared for, Rainvale praised the achievement as worthy of a toast and called for Irena to bring Elbert a drink. Elbert laughed awkwardly and insisted there was no need to make such a fuss. A young woman named Irena arrived and respectfully placed herself at Sir Elbert's service. The sudden sight of Irena left Elbert visibly shaken and momentarily speechless. Rainvale introduced her as his daughter Irena, a remarkably capable young woman who also served as vice president of the Merchants Guild. Elbert quickly realized that Irena's talents seemed to surpass even her father's, which only rattled him more. Rainvale smirked and asked Elbert what he thought of Irena. Elbert flinched when Rainvale casually mentioned that the Elwyn family were looking for civil servants. Irena calmly admitted she was biased, but she considered Lady Marita both impressive and exceptionally talented. Elbert said he had actually been searching for someone with extraordinary ability, so he would gladly employ her, though he still nervously asked if she was truly comfortable with that choice. Rainvale chuckled and said he already knew about Lady Marita's possessive side, then pressed Irena for her honest opinion. Irena said she was especially interested because Elbert had been entrusting civilians and women with important responsibilities, and she believed serving Lady Marita and Sir Elbert would greatly benefit her family. She added that as long as the work was rewarding, she did not mind the strict boundaries around Elbert. Elbert laughed awkwardly and admitted that she had clearly done her research. Pleased by her answer, Elbert officially welcomed Irena aboard. Later, the scene shifted to the Elwyn family castle at night. Elsewhere, a horned young woman watched with flushed excitement and eagerly wondered whether Irena had just become another strong supporter of Elbert. A maid praised Irena's beauty, and Irena nervously worried that Lady Marita might think the outfit and all the attention had gone too far. The maid leaned in and said she and Lady Marita had similar tastes, while Irena, flustered but obedient, quietly said she understood. As the teasing went on, Irena admitted she had never dealt with this kind of attention before, and shyly asked them to help her through it. The maid promised not to push too hard, and Irena could only redden with embarrassment as the relentless fussing continued. Another attendant called for Rochelle, and Rochelle cheerfully stepped in to help Lady Marita manage the situation. The pressure on Irena kept building until she finally cried out for them to stop, clearly pushed past her limit. With a flushed smile, one of the women declared that Irena looked completely prepared to face Elbert now. Elbert gave a tired smile and dryly admitted that even his patience had limits. Surrounded by encouraging women, Irena was told not to worry because they were with her and that she only needed to stay calm around Elbert. In that final tense moment, Irena became utterly overwhelmed, able to focus only on Elbert and the pressure of the situation. Birds chirped outside, and the quiet morning pulled the scene away from the earlier chaos. Irena handed the requested documents to Elbert, and he accepted them with quiet appreciation. Elbert remarked that Irena looked great in her uniform, and Irena politely thanked him for the compliment. Lady Marita leaned in with playful delight and openly added that the uniform suited her especially well. Elbert right away told Lady Marita not to read too much into it and reminded her that Irena worked for him during the day. Lady Marita hurried off to training, eagerly hinting that she was already looking forward to the evening. Left alone with his paperwork, Elbert decided the official measuring system he had introduced was working exactly as intended. The moment takes an uncomfortable turn. Elbert reflected that the official Elwyn family seal was proving its value, and with Rainvale watching the merchants, he felt no one would dare try anything dishonest. With that settled, Elbert turned to the far bigger problem of whether a centralized tax system could somehow be built. Elbert reviewed how the Elwyn domain had spent generations negotiating internal stewardship, and the discomfort of the scene becomes impossible to ignore. He realized many village chiefs had been underreporting what they collected and quietly keeping the surplus, which only made those chiefs and their families more powerful. He also understood that those families functioned like military captains in wartime, so forcing his official measurement system on them could unite the villages in open protest and cries of tyranny. With Stefan's domain near both the Kingdom of Alexa and the Alancian Empire, Elbert judged from military reports that border tensions were rising enough for war to break out at any time. Elbert quietly decided he had to secure the home front while there was still a chance. Then he smirked and considered a simpler method, thinking he could lure them in with a basic carrot-and-stick approach, or maybe just one very large stick. Soon after, he arrived in the northern Elwyn lands at the residence of the village chief council's representative. Elbert apologized for arriving so all of a sudden and said he had come to discuss the official measurement system they had created. The council representative respectfully welcomed him and said he appreciated Sir Albert personally coming to speak about the new system. With a weary sigh, the representative explained that beyond collecting taxes from each town, changing methods after everything they had already suffered would be a major burden. Albert laughed lightly and said he understood exactly what a civil servant under the Empire of the Demons had to endure, so he could sympathize with the man's position. He then placed a document, stamped by Lady Marita, on the table and explained that they were willing to pardon the extra taxes the council had skimmed. The representative reacted with stunned delight as Albert added that such unofficial benefits were sometimes necessary, especially during wartime levies and famine. Albert revealed that they were expanding the civil service and offered priority consideration to the council members' children and relatives, since the work involved bookkeeping, stock management, and tax collection. The old representative was overwhelmed and admitted this was far more than he had ever hoped for, especially after expecting another Elwyn official to trick him. Even while smiling, he wondered if Albert was simply another clever schemer using a softer way to control him. Albert scratched his cheek and added that there was only one condition attached to this generous offer. As he stepped forward, Albert explained that he had managed to persuade Lady Marita to accept the arrangement. In the next instant, the doors burst open with a violent crash, and the room turned tense at once. A furious large warrior stormed in and roared that he had finally found the double-crossing man who had made a fool of him. Lord Banished burst into tears of joy at Albert's arrival, while Albert casually reminded him that he had been told to wait in the carriage. In a hostile flashback, Lord Banished had declared that he heard the town produced plenty of goods, so he had decided to collect extra taxes. When the terrified representative squealed that he would prepare everything at once, Lord Banished aggressively demanded to know if there was a problem and ordered him to speak up. As the man trembled and denied ever trying anything dishonest, Lord Banished warned that he was lucky not to be severely punished for stealing from him. Lord Banished seized the older man by the collar and raged that he might cripple him for this, leaving the representative shaking in panic. Albert calmly stepped in and told Lord Banished there was no need to go that far. The older representative clung to Albert in relief, while Albert gently reminded him that Lady Marita had already agreed to let the matter slide. Lord Banished forced himself to calm down and warned that the man was dealing with Lord Banished himself, adding that demons hated liars more than anything. With a calm smile, Albert said that if he were allowed to inspect the tax ledgers, he might still be able to smooth things over, leaving the older man sweating over his next move. The representative flinched at the mention of the tax ledgers, and his alarm became obvious when Albert told him not to claim they did not exist. Albert smiled and said those records were necessary, since Lord Banishd's son would need them to properly judge the town once he took over. The older man collapsed in fear and hesitated, struggling to find any explanation. Lord Banished barked that if there was nothing to hide, the man should show them right away, and the older man panicked and said he would bring everything at once. As he ran off in terror, the older man begged them to spare him. 1 week later at Ashley Castle, stacks of tax ledgers arrived after Albert ordered every town in the domain to submit them. Albert lightly remarked that the tax documents had been turned over voluntarily. Lady Marita dryly added that they had only done so because Lord Banished would have forced the matter otherwise. Albert noted that he had also mentioned the tax debt could be forgiven if the ledgers were submitted without resistance or criminal charges. The older man nervously admitted that the chiefs had been skimming village taxes, claiming they needed extra labor if they were to keep their privileges. Lady Marita coldly concluded that this meant the children taken as civil servants were effectively hostages. Albert smiled with quiet confidence and told Irena he had known she would handle it. To everyone else, Albert seemed like the terrifying reason no one dared resist, since the Elwyn family name and their restored military strength made escape feel impossible. After carefully reviewing the tax ledgers, Albert realized every single village had brought in more than double the income that had been officially reported. Once each town handed over the demon's traditional annual tax with little resistance, the Elwyn domain's finances quickly recovered to their former strength. Millevice worked himself to exhaustion balancing the books, then rose to become head of domestic affairs and earned the title Wizard of Accounting. When Albert combined the rural villages with Ashley Town, he calculated a total population of just under 16,000 people. He then noted that much of the Elwyn domain still remained uncultivated, meaning the territory could eventually support around 50,000 people. Even so, only a little under 1,000 farmers were ready to be mobilized, and with the end of harvest approaching, the threat of major war was already closing in. Satisfied for the moment, Albert quietly laughed to himself until a maid informed him that Lady Marita was calling for him. As the maids hurried in around him, the sudden attention left Albert flustered and overwhelmed. Albert had just been thinking that his work at night was going surprisingly well, too. Inside the quiet building, only the sharp chirping outside disturbed the calm. A messenger all of a sudden rushed in and urgently reported to Sir Albert that grave news had arrived from the Empire. Startled, Albert hurriedly straightened his clothes while Lady Marita pressed to know what had happened. The exhausted messenger reported that Lord Stephen's domain had been raided and that he was demanding immediate reinforcements. Albert froze in shock and realized the attack had come far too early, before harvest season had even ended. Several weeks earlier, in the kingdom of Alexa, the scene shifted to Prince Orgus's residence as someone formally addressed His Majesty. Orgus's guardian, Premier Zazan, smugly revealed that the royal guard had already been dispatched. As a bottle was set down, someone coldly remarked that this delay had dragged on long enough. An angry royal figure lashed out that he had been kept waiting for months over a mere 5,000 soldiers, leaving the subordinate trembling under the pressure. The trembling commander reported that resistance from the lords in the war-torn territories had been far stronger than expected. His Majesty crushed his cup in anger and mocked them as useless crybabies. The commander quickly insisted there was no problem, because reclaiming the 3 cities lost in the recent attack would surely satisfy the king. Sweating heavily, he nervously added that His Majesty himself, as commander-in-chief, would surely lead the troops to Tiana and oversee the battle. Orgus coldly rejected that idea and declared that he would never set foot in such a filthy slaughterhouse. Confused and cornered, the commander could only ask what the point of being commander-in-chief was then. Orgus snapped back that the commander would go in his place. The commander stared in shock, barely able to believe he had just been chosen. As the commander panicked that it was still the middle of harvest and a battle now would be risky, Orgus ordered him to relay instructions from his plane in the capital and begin the invasion right away. When the commander tried to comply while still stammering, Orgus silenced him and made it clear that no opinion had been requested. Orgus fumed that he was surrounded by useless idiots, and his frustration only deepened. Grinding his teeth in rage, Orgus wished he had at least one subordinate capable of thinking for himself. From Orgus's point of view, the entire disaster traced back to the priest's letter, and he bitterly blamed that cursed priest for all of it. He convinced himself that with just one more month, they would retake the 3 stolen cities of Zora, Venia, and Taizan. As his anger simmered, Orgus swore that once he recovered his standing, he would uncover where that pathetic priest Albert had disappeared to and settle things with the older brother who had endangered his status. With a cold glare, Orgus vowed that they were all as good as dead. He burst into loud laughter and confidently declared that his troops would soon return victorious. Elsewhere, a horned female fighter stomped in and ordered everyone to gear up and prepare for war right away. The calm new fighter realized the situation was worse than expected and admitted he had badly miscalculated. He had already known the invasion was coming, but he never imagined the commander-in-chief would start a war in the middle of harvest season. The Alancian Empire had nearly 5,000 troops surrounding Stefan's garrison, while the kingdom of Alexa could defend it with only about 3,000. He calculated that Stefan might hold if reinforcements arrived, but in harvest season there were barely any farmers left to send. He knew that if the enemy reclaimed the land they had lost, all the trust they had built would collapse and everything would be thrown back to the start. Shaken, Albert admitted that Orgus had been smarter than expected, and worse, he feared Orgus might even pull the Demon Lord into punishing him for helping ignite this war. Far away, Orgus laughed to himself, certain Albert was too foolish to notice the trap until it closed. When the horned female fighter demanded to know what Albert was doing, she found him standing there deep in thought instead of rushing out with the others. Albert said he was trying to form a plan, but she lit up and insisted this was the battle she had been waiting for, and they had to move now. Another eager fighter boasted that their vassals were ready to march at once and dismiss the enemy as a disorganized crowd of untrained country people. A horned young warrior proudly declared that this would be her first true battle, and rejoiced that she could finally prove what she could do. At the same time, a furious horned veteran cursed the others as fools and barked that war was supposed to be his field. The demon troops exploded into cheers for war, greeting the coming battle with reckless joy. Albert forced out a nervous laugh and reminded himself that he was meant to be commanding the demon race's strongest army, even as their excitement left him unsettled. He studied the battlefield with care, reminding himself that he knew the terrain and that most of the enemy were farmers whose morale had dropped with their commander gone. Then his hands slowly clenched, and Albert realized he had found a path out of the crisis. A confident smile finally appeared as he told Lady Merida that he knew exactly what to do. The blonde warrior brightened at once when she learned she would lead the vanguard with 100 soldiers. Lord Burist was assigned the next squad of 75, and he accepted with eager confidence. Latour was ordered to command the rear with 25 soldiers, and she answered without a hint of hesitation. Albert declared that no farmers would take part, that only cavalrymen would join, and that he would personally oversee the transport of supplies to the front. At that moment, a man approached and respectfully called out to Sir Albert. The older man anxiously pointed out that the enemy heavily outnumbered them, even as he admitted he understood how fearsome the demons were. Albert laughed softly, told Millivice not to worry, and ordered the wagon loaded with only the bare minimum of provisions because he already had a plan. The order moved through the camp at once, and every bit of remaining wagon space was filled with spears. With a confident smile, Albert told them to hold the fort until his return, and someone sent him off with a wish for good luck. The blonde warrior flashed a fierce grin, glad to be back in a real war after growing tired of routine patrols and eager to fight again. At the front on horseback, she shouted for the Elwyn demon army to attack, and the troops surged after her in a wave. As the battle cries swelled around him, Elbert understood that the fight that would decide his fate had finally begun.